Did you know World War II is basically the sequel that ruins the franchise? If WWI was a messy group chat argument, World War II was the moment they decided to burn the house down. It all revolves around one guy, Adolf Hitler. He was born in Austria, failed at art school twice, and ended up broke and resentful. He joined the German army, got radicalized by the WWI loss, and found his purpose in blaming everyone else. He joins a tiny extremist group that eventually becomes the Nazi Party. They were obsessed with this idea of a master race and blamed Jewish people and political enemies for Germany's economic disaster. After a failed attempt to overthrow the government landed him in jail, he wrote a manifesto, refined his toxic influencer persona, and used the Great Depression to convince voters he was the fix. By 1933, he becomes chancellor and creates the Third Reich. He basically deletes democracy, silences all critics, and turns the government into his own personal cult. He promised Germany they were destined for greatness, but the reality was just a massive power trip built on hate and propaganda. He was officially the final boss of the 1930s. Hitler's big excuse for war was Lebensraum, which is just a fancy way of saying he wanted to steal land from his neighbors to build his master empire. He annexed Austria and parts of Czechoslovakia, and the world just let him do it because they were terrified of another war. He was a bully who realized he could get away with anything if he pushed hard enough. Finally, in 1939, he invaded Poland. That was the line in the sand. Britain and France realized this guy wasn't going to stop until he owned the map. But while Hitler was busy speedrunning Europe, the other side of the world was gearing up for their own chaotic mess. Japan was playing a different but equally dangerous game of global domination. To pull off his rise to power, Hitler needed a common enemy to unite people against, and he chose the Jewish community as his primary target. He pushed a deeply toxic narrative, framing Jewish people as an existential threat and spreading outright lies that they were beneath the German population and responsible for the country's post-WWI economic ruin. By dehumanizing an entire group, he manufactured a fake crisis that he claimed only he could solve, using fear-mongering to rally massive public support and lock down total control. Once he had the public under his spell, he used these fabricated threats as a twisted excuse to kickstart his aggressive expansion, invading neighboring countries under the guise of protecting the nation. As Hitler tightened his grip on power, his hateful rhetoric turned into a systematic, state-sponsored campaign of mass murder known as the Holocaust. The Nazi regime built a vast network of concentration and extermination camps designed for one horrific purpose: the industrial-scale elimination of anyone they deemed undesirable. Millions of Jewish people, alongside political dissidents, Romani people, individuals with disabilities, and other targeted groups, were forcibly separated from their families, stripped of their humanity, and subjected to unspeakable conditions. By the end of the war, 6 million Jewish lives, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, had been systematically murdered, leaving behind a devastating legacy of human cruelty that the world vowed never to forget. In Europe, you have the Germans, Nazis, wanting to control the entire Europe, and in the Pacific, you have Japan, who has a big plan of their own. They wanted to be the main superpower in Asia and the Pacific. They needed resources like oil and metal to fuel their military, and they saw Western colonies in Asia as their own personal supply closets. It was pure imperialism. They wanted to control the entire Pacific to ensure no one could challenge them. But there was one problem: the United States. The U.S. had a massive presence in the Pacific. Japan knew that if they wanted to rule the region, they had to take out the U.S. fleet before it could stop them. They decided to gamble everything on one surprise move, hoping to shock the U.S. into staying out of their way. It was the ultimate high-risk, low-reward gamble, and it backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Before we talk about the sleeping bear waking up, I need to know your take on this. If you were a history strategist, would you rather defend a continent from a land invasion or defend a massive ocean from a naval fleet? Think about it. December 7, 1941, Japan launches a massive surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Their intention was to cripple the U.S. Navy so they could finish their takeover of the Pacific without interference. But it was a complete strategic failure. They missed key targets, and they accidentally unified the entire U.S. population in anger. They didn't just poke the bear, they hit it with a stick. The US declared war the next day. This turned the conflict into a true global battle royale. America unleashed its industrial might, printing ships, tanks, and planes faster than anyone thought possible. They were now fighting a two-front war against both Germany and Japan. It was the pay-to-win update the Allies desperately needed to flip the script on the Axis powers. By 1944, the Allies were closing in from everywhere. They stormed the beaches of France on D-Day, squeezing Germany from the west while Russia pounded them from the east. Germany's resources hit zero, and Hitler, facing total defeat, took his own life in a bunker. The European server shut down, but the war in the Pacific raged on. Japan refused to surrender, so the US made the controversial, history-altering decision to drop 2 atomic bombs. These 2 atomic bombs were built in secret, called the Manhattan Project, but we can discuss that in another video. It was a brutal end to a brutal conflict. The war finally ended. Germany and Japan both surrendered unconditionally, and the world began the massive task of cleaning up the rubble. They formed the UN, United Nations, the planet's new HR department, to prevent this from happening again. History is just choices having consequences. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.